The rain hit the pavement like it had a personal vendetta against me. My heels splashed through puddles I didn't even care to avoid, and my coat, expensive, sure, but useless, clung to my skin like a second punishment. I hadn't planned on ending up soaked and shivering on the sidewalk, but then again, I hadn't planned on the night my entire life crumbled either. I remember that moment perfectly, the night Richard slammed the door on me, as if I were some kind of garbage he didn't want to touch. I stood there, drenched, heart pounding, shaking from more than just the cold. The wind whipped my hair across my face, and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Me, kicked out into the storm by my own son. Funny how life can flip the script in a heartbeat. For years, I'd lived for him. I'd swallowed my pride, swallowed my anger, and bent myself into shapes I didn't even recognize. All for Richard and then for that ungrateful family that never appreciated me. And now, all that sacrifice felt like ash in my mouth. I didn't even know where to start fixing the pieces, or if I even wanted to. But that's when she appeared. My mother, always calm, always composed, like some kind of queen who knew the world and didn't even flinch. There she was, standing under a big black parasol in her garden, the kind that screamed money, taste, and power, but also love. She didn't rush me or scold me for being pathetic. She just smiled. That smile, it had the kind of warmth that could melt a glacier. "Good morning, dear," she said, and for some reason, I wanted to throw my arms around her and cry, but I didn't. Not yet. I just let her pour the tea, the steam rising between us like a fragile shield. "We need to talk about your future," she said, like a general giving orders before battle. "Future?" I repeated. My voice was weak. "I can barely think about the present." She didn't flinch. "I know. But Sarah, you spent decades living for everyone else. First Richard, then that family. Now it's time to live for yourself." I swallowed hard, tears threatening, because what she said made sense and hurt all at once. I had no idea how to start living for me. I don't even know where to start," I admitted, voice trembling. She took my hand, firm and steady. "Start by letting me help. Not out of obligation, not pity, but because you're my daughter. Because I love you and you deserve it." The days that followed were nothing short of surreal. My mother didn't just talk about helping me. She executed it like a general running a military campaign. Psychologists came to untangle my trauma. Nutritionists mapped out my recovery. And an image consultant, bless her, helped me figure out how to look like someone who belonged in a boardroom instead of crying in the rain. But the real game changer? Education. Not just a class, not a seminar, actual, real-world business schooling. My mother opened the doors to her empire, walked me through her properties, companies, investments, everything. And at first, I was drowning. I was just a housewife. How the hell was I supposed to understand corporate finance, mergers, and negotiations? Yet, slowly, I realized something I hadn't in decades. I was smarter than I thought. Years of stretching budgets, negotiating with vendors, managing chaos at home. It had been training. "You were always an executive," my mother said once, and I laughed, bitter, but knowing it was true. I just never had the right resources. Then came the letters from Richard. The first one hit like a punch to the gut. Apologies, confessions, the kind of soul-bearing I'd waited years to hear. But it came too late to erase the pain. I cried, tears streaming, my mother silently by my side, letting me feel everything without judgment. "What do you want to do?" she asked softly when I finished. I didn't know. Part of me wanted to run to him. Part of me knew he needed to feel the consequences. I think he's starting to change," I whispered, and she nodded. "Real change takes time. A letter isn't proof," she said carefully. Weeks rolled into months. My transformation wasn't just physical, though my reflection now screamed power and confidence. It was mental, emotional, spiritual. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize at first, someone strong, capable, in control. My mother started inviting me to meetings, and I realized people actually listened, not because I was the boss's daughter, but because my ideas made sense. "Have you considered working here permanently?" one executive asked after a successful meeting. Me? A housewife? Yet somehow, I was now seriously thinking about it. 3 months later, my mother made me an offer I hadn't dared to dream. CEO of one of her companies. "You've earned it," she said bluntly. "You proved you have the capacity." I laughed in disbelief. "Me? CEO? I barely have experience," I stammered. "You have 40 years of real-life experience," she corrected me, eyes sharp. "In solving problems, managing crises, persisting when everything is against you. That's worth more than any MBA." And just like that, the woman who had been kicked out into the rain became a force to be reckoned with. The storm was still outside that first night, but inside, something new had been born. Something strong. Something unstoppable. The office smelled like leather and ambition, the kind of place that made your chest tighten and your brain start running marathons. My first day as CEO wasn't glamorous. It was brutal. Reports, meetings, emails piling up like a mountain. I had no gear to climb. But I reminded myself, I'd survived worse. I had been kicked out into the rain, abandoned by the people I trusted. And somehow, I had gotten up. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Carla, gave me a once-over that screamed skepticism. "First day jitters?" she asked with a smirk. "Not exactly," I replied, flipping open a binder. "Let's get to work." The team was rough around the edges. Some of them barely tolerated me because I wasn't the typical corporate breed. I was a woman who'd spent decades in a domestic battlefield, not Harvard lecture halls. But I noticed things they didn't. Patterns, habits, weaknesses, opportunities. Slowly my voice started carrying weight in the room. Not because I demanded respect, but because I actually understood the people, the numbers, the grind. Then came Richard. He showed up at the office a few weeks later, trying to act casual, like he hadn't ruined everything. "Sarah," he said, leaning against the doorway, with that half-smile that used to melt me. "Congratulations." I raised an eyebrow. "Thanks. And you?" "Doing better," he said carefully. "Better how?" I asked, curious despite myself. He laughed nervously. "You know, life. Learning. Making amends." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. Not fully. Not until he proved his words with action. Not promises. Still, I couldn't deny a small warmth in my chest. Maybe he was changing. Maybe. Work consumed me. I learned to negotiate like a shark, to read contracts like a novel, and to spot deceit before it even had a chance to take root. Every victory, every smart decision was a brick in the fortress I was building around myself. One afternoon, my mother called. "Ashley," she said, and I braced myself. "You're doing well. But remember, power can make people careless. Stay sharp." "Always," I said, and she smiled through the phone. She always had a way of making me feel like I could take over the world and still have room to breathe. Weeks later, an unexpected challenge arrived. Ashley, Richard's ex-wife, the nightmare I'd been dreading, was back in the picture. Her name appeared in an email, messy legal threats attached, claiming Richard had hidden assets during their divorce. I felt my pulse quicken, but only for a moment. My mother had already taught me how to handle venom with ice, and that's exactly what I did. I picked up the phone and called Richard. "You've got Ashley trouble," I said simply. He sighed, guilt written all over his face. "I know. I tried handling it myself, but she's relentless." "Let me," I said, surprising even myself. "Mom taught me how to deal with people like her. We end this fast." By the next week, my lawyers had shredded her claims like tissue paper. Evidence of fraud, forged documents, desperation. It was all exposed. She left humiliated, her reputation in ruins. Karma finally worked in our favor. Through all of this, I realized something. Strength wasn't just about fighting back. It was about learning who you are, what you deserve, and refusing to settle for anything less. Every sleepless night, every tough boardroom meeting, every confrontation with Ashley, it was all shaping me. I wasn't the scared, drenched woman from 3 years ago. I was a CEO, a mother, a warrior. Richard noticed the change too. He started showing up, not to plead, not to manipulate, but to genuinely reconnect. Small gestures first, checking in, respectful conversations, sincere apologies. I watched him rebuild himself slowly, the same way I had built mine. And I realized something important. I could love him without letting him control me. I could care without surrendering. And somewhere deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning. Months passed, and life at the company became a rhythm I could finally trust. I was no longer reacting. I was anticipating. My days were filled with strategy sessions, calls with investors, and endless negotiations. I learned to read people the way a detective reads a crime scene. Every hesitation, every tone, every glance told a story. Some colleagues still doubted me, but those who did quickly learned that underestimating me was a mistake they couldn't afford. Richard, meanwhile, became a quieter presence in my life. He didn't push, he didn't plead. He simply existed, showing up when needed, offering help without overstepping, and quietly proving that he had changed. One evening, as I was leaving the office after a grueling 12-hour day, he waited for me by the parking lot. "You're amazing," he said softly, as if that simple sentence carried decades of meaning. I glanced at him, tired but curious. "Amazing how?" "You, everything. How you handled Ashley, the company, yourself. You're incredible, Sarah." I smiled a little, but it was cautious. "Thanks, but don't forget you've been learning too." "I am," he admitted. "I see the way you move through life, and I want to be better. For me, for you, for the future. I didn't know if I fully believed him yet. The wounds from the past were deep, and trust isn't rebuilt overnight. But something in his voice, the sincerity, the humility, made me wonder if people could truly change. Then came the day he introduced her. I hadn't met her before. She walked in like a quiet force of nature, simple, gentle, and undeniably kind. An elementary school teacher named Emily, who radiated authenticity. She didn't flaunt wealth or status. She didn't talk about business or power. She only smiled at Richard like he was the center of her universe. And the way he looked back at her made something inside me ache and heal at the same time. "She's special," Richard said later, when we were alone. "She doesn't know my past, Sarah. She only sees who I am now, and she loves me for that." I nodded, half in relief, half in quiet sorrow. "Then don't mess it up," I warned, part joking, part serious. "Never," he promised solemnly. I've learned my lesson the hard way. As Richard found love and stability, I focused on expanding my empire. The merger I had been negotiating with Ashley's ex-husband's company became the ultimate test of my business acumen. The boardroom was a battlefield, with lawyers and executives throwing numbers, contracts, and threats like daggers. But I stayed calm, measured, and relentless. By the end of the negotiation, not only did I secure the merger, but I also ensured it worked entirely in our favor. Through it all, I reflected on the lessons my mother had taught me. Power isn't about intimidation. It's about strategy. Strength isn't just physical. It's mental, emotional, and moral. And revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what's yours, building something new from the ashes of the past. The little victories at work were satisfying, but the personal victories were even more profound. Richard's transformation, Emily's gentle love, and my mother's unwavering support created a circle of trust and hope I had never thought possible. Yet there was one moment that truly tested me. The first time I held Richard and Emily's future child in my arms. A fragile little girl with wide eyes and soft fingers. I felt something shift in me that day. A mix of fear, hope, and determination. I wanted to protect her from the pain I had endured, but I also wanted her to see the strength a woman could wield when she refused to be broken. I knew that my mother's sacrifices, my own struggles, and even the betrayals I had faced were all threads in a tapestry that had prepared me for this moment. Richard's voice came quietly beside me. "She's beautiful," he said, almost in awe. "And I want to do this right. For her, for you, for all of us." I looked at him, really looked, and realized that while he wasn't the center of my world anymore, he had become part of a future I wanted to embrace. "Then let's make sure she knows what love really is," I said softly. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still challenges, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But I had learned that life didn't need to be perfect. It needed resilience, boundaries, and honesty. I had learned that I could love without losing myself, and that power didn't have to be ruthless to be effective. By the end of that year, my life was unrecognizable from the woman I had been 3 years prior. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I had a thriving business, a family slowly mending, and a sense of peace that had once felt impossible. And through it all, I realized that the greatest victories weren't measured in money or status. They were measured in the ability to stand tall after every storm, to protect those you loved, and to never, ever forget your worth. The day of Richard's wedding arrived quietly, almost inconspicuously. Unlike the grand, chaotic events I had feared from the past, Emily's vision of the ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and profoundly human. No extravagance, no unnecessary spectacle, just love, sincerity, and family. I found myself watching her prepare, marveling at the ease with which she carried herself. She had no idea of the storms Richard had weathered, or the storms I had survived. Yet she radiated acceptance and warmth. Richard was a bundle of nervous energy, pacing in the garden, trying to act composed but failing beautifully. I watched him and felt that odd mixture of pride and relief. He had transformed, really and fully, from the man who had once been so lost and reckless to someone capable of love and responsibility. He caught my gaze and smiled sheepishly. "I'm trying not to mess this up," he whispered. "You won't," I replied, though my heart ached slightly, not from jealousy, but from the deep awareness that life had moved on, and that some places in our hearts were meant to grow beyond old wounds. The ceremony itself was a quiet marvel. Emily's words were soft but genuine. Richard's vows were trembling, raw, but filled with a newfound honesty that made every eye in the garden glisten with emotion. As they exchanged rings, I felt an odd sense of closure. The past, the betrayal, the fear, all of it felt contained in this single, serene moment. And then came the reception. I watched them dance, watched Richard laugh freely for the first time in years, saw Emily's hand in his, and realized that this wasn't just a wedding. It was a symbol of second chances, of growth, and of the rewards of patience. I was happy for them, truly. But more than that, I was quietly proud of myself. I had survived, I had rebuilt, and I had learned to love without losing my sense of self. A few months later, the birth of their daughter brought a new dimension to our lives. I still remember the call from Richard, his voice breaking with emotion. "Mom, she's here, our little girl, and I want to do this right. I want her to have the grandmother you were for me, the one who fought, who loved, who never gave up." Holding that tiny bundle for the first time, I felt an old pain soften, not disappear, not fully. Some scars are permanent, but softened enough to let hope seep in. This child, innocent and untouched by the storms of the past, represented everything I had fought for: protection, love, and a legacy of strength. I watched Richard with her, his movements careful, attentive, and almost reverent. Emily's quiet guidance and nurturing presence completed the picture. I realized that what they had created together was not just a family, but a safe harbor from the storms that had defined my own past. Meanwhile, the shadow of Ashley loomed faintly in my mind. Her lawsuit had failed spectacularly, but her presence in memory remained a reminder of how fragile trust and power can be If left unchecked, I received word that she had moved to another state, her reputation destroyed, almost erased from the social and business circles she had tried to manipulate. Karma, finally, had done its work. I allowed myself a private smile, not from malice, but from recognition that justice, true justice, had been served. As the weeks turned into months, Richard, Emily, and their daughter became a part of my daily life in subtle, profound ways. Morning calls to check in, afternoon walks in the garden, quiet evenings where we simply existed together. It was a rhythm that replaced chaos with harmony, and it reminded me that life, no matter how brutal or unfair it may start, has a way of balancing itself if you're strong enough to endure. I also noticed the subtle transformation in my mother. She softened around the baby, no longer holding on to every grievance against Richard, though she remained cautious. "I won't punish an innocent child for the sins of her father," she said pragmatically. "But he still has to prove himself." And prove himself he did. Small acts of kindness, consistency, and gratitude that slowly built a bridge between past pain and future possibility. ... Enough and gratitude that slowly built a bridge between past pain and future possibility. One Sunday afternoon, nearly 3 years after that rainy night that had changed everything, we were all gathered in the mansion's garden. Richard was playing with his daughter, Emily watching quietly, and my mother and I sat nearby. There was an odd mixture of tension and tenderness in the air, a reminder of the distance that had once existed, now replaced with cautious connection. "He's changed," my mother observed quietly, almost reluctantly. "For real this time," I agreed, watching Richard's laughter ripple across the garden. But then I realized something else. I had changed too, hardened by pain, tempered by struggle, and strengthened by the love and lessons of my mother. I was no longer the frightened, vulnerable woman who had once feared storms. I had learned to forgive without forgetting, to love without losing myself, and to embrace life on my own terms. As I looked at my granddaughter's tiny sleeping face, I felt the final pieces of the past settle into place. Life had given me more than survival. It had given me rebirth, love, and a clarity of purpose. And for the first time in years, I felt a profound, quiet peace. The air in the office felt electric. Not with chaos, not with panic, but with purpose. After 3 years of rebuilding, learning, and surviving, I had fully stepped into the role I had once feared. CEO not just in title, but in presence, in authority, in vision. My mother's legacy, once a shadow that intimidated me, now stood behind me as a foundation I could confidently build upon. I wasn't just her daughter anymore. I was my own force. The first major project on my desk that morning was a merger proposal with a tech startup that had been struggling but held enormous potential. I scanned the reports meticulously, but unlike before, I didn't feel panic at the sheer weight of responsibility. I felt anticipation. Each decision I made was deliberate, informed, and strategic. I had grown to trust my instincts, sharpened by years of trial, error, and survival. My assistant, a young woman named Clara, approached nervously. "Ms. Sanders, the board wants your input on the final draft before the meeting." I looked up at her, a small smile playing on my lips. Let's make them see why we're not just surviving. We're thriving, I said. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty, the kind that only comes from knowing what it means to almost lose everything and then claw it back stronger than ever. The boardroom was tense at first, the kind of tension that comes when a room full of executives tries to gauge a leader's competence. But as I spoke, outlining the plan with precision, vision, and clarity, the room shifted. Questions were asked, objections raised, but I was ready. Every counterpoint had a solution. Every doubt had a strategy. I wasn't just responding. I was leading, shaping the conversation, commanding respect. By the end of the hour, the board members weren't just convinced, they were inspired. Later, in the quiet of my office, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. The journey from that rainy night to this very moment had been long, tortuous, and sometimes terrifying. But I had arrived, and not just arrived. I had conquered. Of course, life outside the office demanded attention too. Richard, now a devoted father, called regularly, sharing moments both mundane and profound from his life, with Emily and their daughter. I was no longer caught in old resentments. I was able to celebrate his happiness without pain because my own life was full, abundant, and meaningful. One afternoon, as I left the office and walked through the city streets, I saw a familiar face, Ashley. Her expression was one of shock, but also, unmistakably, defeat. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The power in knowing that I had moved on, that she had fallen, and that justice had been served was far greater than any words I could offer. I had evolved past needing revenge. My life itself was the answer. At home, I spent evenings planning expansion strategies for the companies under my leadership, mentoring young women entering the business world, and occasionally indulging in small luxuries I had once denied myself. But the real reward was in seeing myself reflected in the mirror, not just as a CEO, not just as a survivor, but as someone who understood her worth and refused to compromise it ever again. Richard's family life flourished alongside mine. He remained a steady, positive force in our lives, demonstrating consistently that he was capable of love, loyalty, and patience. Watching him with his daughter, I saw the man I'd once hoped he could become. And now, thanks to time, guidance, and growth, he had become him fully. Even my mother, once so strict and calculating, softened in ways that surprised me. She continued to advise, caution, and teach. Now she did so with pride, not worry. Her approval was no longer a conditional test, but a recognition of my strength and independence. The greatest lesson of all became clear to me. True power is not about destruction. It is about rebuilding, nurturing, and protecting what you value. It is about knowing when to fight, when to forgive, and when to let life unfold. And above all, it is about respecting yourself enough to never again allow others to dictate your worth. As I settled into bed that night, I reflected on the journey. The storms, the betrayals, the moments of despair. They were all part of a crucible that had forged me. I had survived the rain, the lies, the manipulation, and the heartbreak. And now, standing in the calm aftermath, I was not just whole, I was unstoppable. The city lights glittered outside my window, and I realized something profound. The darkness of the past could never touch me again. I had built something far stronger than any obstacle. A life of purpose, love, and undeniable power. And this was only the beginning. Life, I soon realized, had a way of testing even those who seemed untouchable. Just as I had grown comfortable in my strength, a new challenge emerged, one that wasn't about boardrooms, mergers, or money. This time, it was personal, subtle, and insidious. It started with a call from the hospital one evening. "Mrs. Sanders, it's about your mother. She's had a mild heart episode. You should come immediately." My heart sank, and I rushed to her side. Seeing her frail, yet stubborn figure in the hospital bed, I felt a mixture of fear and resolve. Life had reminded me that even the strongest pillars could tremble. ... Over the next few days, I stayed by her side, ensuring she was comfortable, managing her care, and quietly observing her reactions. My mother, ever the stoic woman, refused to admit vulnerability, but I saw it in her eyes. The quiet recognition that she was no longer in complete control, that her daughter, the woman she had forged through fire and rain, had grown into a caretaker, protector, and equal. During a rare quiet moment, she spoke. "You've changed, Margaret. You've become formidable. I always knew you had it, but I didn't realize just how much until now." Her words, simple yet weighted, cut through me. I felt a surge of emotion, not just pride, but gratitude. She had given me the tools, the lessons, the freedom to grow, and now in this room, the roles had subtly shifted. While my mother recovered, I balanced my work and her care, navigating negotiations, handling crises, and mentoring my team, all while learning patience and empathy on an entirely new level. I realized that true leadership wasn't about commanding respect. It was about nurturing it, showing strength and compassion simultaneously. Meanwhile, Richard's life continued to flourish. His daughter, bright and curious, became a constant reminder of resilience and love. Watching him with her, I marveled at how much he had changed, how consistent effort, respect, and patience could truly transform a person. Our bond, once fractured by betrayal and misunderstanding, had evolved into something quiet, steady, and deep. We shared moments of laughter, gentle debates, and the occasional nostalgic reflection on the past. Not to relive pain, but to acknowledge growth. Yet life wasn't without its tests. One morning, as I was reviewing a new acquisition proposal, a message appeared on my screen. "Ashley." I froze. Years had passed, yet just the name carried a ripple of tension. She claimed she had started a new venture and wanted a meeting to discuss potential collaboration. Part of me felt a flicker of old anger, but I quickly buried it. This was no longer about revenge. This was about control, poise, and boundaries. I agreed to the meeting, but on my terms. Neutral location, clear agenda, and my lawyer present. The day arrived and I saw her. Older, wearied, no longer radiating the confidence that had once intimidated me. She tried her usual charm, but I was unmoved. Every tactic she used, manipulation, flattery, intimidation, was met with calm, measured responses. I didn't just refuse her schemes. I dismantled them with evidence, clarity, and authority. By the end, she left humiliated, powerless, and I felt only the lightness of closure. That evening, I reflected on the journey. The woman who had once been at the mercy of deceit, betrayal, and circumstance was now unshakable. My life was no longer dictated by fear, resentment, or longing. It was dictated by purpose, integrity, and love, both for myself and those I cared about. I also realized that my mother's wisdom had one final lesson embedded in these trials. Strength wasn't just surviving storms, it was thriving in calm after them, helping others rise, and protecting what mattered without sacrificing oneself. It was the quiet, unyielding power that didn't need validation because it existed inherently. By the time my mother was fully recovered, I had fully embraced this philosophy. Our relationship transformed once more, not just mother and daughter, but allies, equals, and mutual pillars of support. I no longer sought her approval because I had found my own, and in doing so, I had also strengthened her faith in herself, proving that the daughter she had raised was more than capable of creating a legacy worth remembering. By the time autumn arrived, the mansion had settled into a rhythm of warmth, laughter, and understated elegance. The baby's first steps, Richard's pride, and my mother's steady presence created a tapestry of life that was both grounding and inspiring. I often found myself walking through the halls at night, watching the moonlight spill across the polished floors, thinking about how far we had all come, from storms, betrayals, and loss, to resilience, love, and renewal. Business was no longer just about power. It was about responsibility. I had inherited not only companies, but also legacies, livelihoods, and reputations. Every decision I made carried weight, and I felt the pulse of every employee who trusted me, every partner who depended on my judgment, and every competitor who underestimated me. I thrived in the chaos, but I no longer needed it to prove myself. My confidence was quiet, internal, rooted in competence, integrity, and experience. Richard continued to rebuild his life on his terms. His marriage flourished, not because of grand gestures, but because of consistency, attentiveness, and authenticity. He would call me sometimes, not for business, not for advice, but simply to share milestones or reflect on parenting. Hearing him laugh with his daughter, or seeing the tender way he looked at his wife, filled me with a quiet satisfaction. This was the life I had wanted for him, not dictated by me, not by his past, but guided by love and the lessons we had both learned. Then came an unexpected test. A rival conglomerate, jealous of my rapid rise and the innovative strategies I had implemented, began undermining one of my subsidiaries. False rumors, smear campaigns, and aggressive poaching of employees threatened to destabilize months of careful work. The board was anxious, the media was hungry, and competitors sensed weakness. I could have reacted impulsively, but 3 years of storms had taught me restraint. I organized a strategy session with my top executives. "We're not here to react," I told them firmly. "We're here to plan. We're going to meet every challenge head on, but with precision, intelligence, and professionalism." We will not be drawn into chaos. We will control the narrative, protect our people, and come out stronger. We spent days analyzing every potential move, every legal pathway, and every media strategy. By the time we were ready, our approach was surgical. Not only did we neutralize the attacks, but we also exposed the rivals' unethical tactics to the public, gaining admiration and loyalty from partners and clients alike. The boardroom erupted in applause, but I barely smiled. Victory wasn't in recognition. It was in the knowledge that we had acted decisively, ethically, and strategically. Through it all, my mother watched from her study, offering quiet observations, subtle guidance, and the occasional pointed question that forced me to think beyond the numbers. "Remember," she said one evening, "power without compassion is hollow. Strength without wisdom is dangerous. You've proven you can survive storms, but can you shape the skies?" Her words resonated deeply. I realized that my journey was never about revenge, ego, or competition. It was about mastery over myself, my choices, and my world. Every challenge was a lesson, every threat an opportunity to refine judgment, every relationship a mirror reflecting my growth. Amidst the victories and trials, the personal moments remained the most grounding. Watching my granddaughter take her first wobbly steps, Richard softly singing to her, my mother knitting quietly in the corner. These simple acts of life reminded me that legacy wasn't only measured in boardrooms or contracts. It was measured in love, integrity, and the strength to rise again and again, no matter how devastating the storm had been. One evening, alone in my office, I reflected on the journey. I picked up my journal, the one that had borne witness to my darkest nights and earliest victories. I reread entries from years past, the pain, the confusion, the fury, and I realized how far I had come. The Margaret Sanders, who had been broken, betrayed, and abandoned, no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had faced storms, endured loss, embraced responsibility, and mastered both the world and herself. I wrote a new entry. I am no longer defined by the past, by the betrayals, by the storms. I am defined by how I rise, how I build, how I love, and how I protect. Every scar tells a story. Every victory is earned, and every relationship is nurtured with care. I am not just surviving. I am shaping, creating, and thriving. And this is only the beginning. That night, I looked out at the mansion, at the garden where Richard and his family laughed, at the stars above that seemed to shimmer just for us. I understood fully that peace wasn't the absence of storms. It was the mastery of self, the courage to love, the wisdom to forgive, and the strength to protect. The world had tested me, but I had emerged not just unbroken, but transformed, luminous, and unstoppable. The winter had settled over the city, but inside the mansion, life radiated warmth, laughter, and quiet triumph. By now, the rhythm of our blended family was natural. Richard, his wife, our granddaughter, my mother, and I had found a delicate balance between love, respect, and independence. Each of us had grown, changed, and healed in our own time, and yet there was a shared understanding that bound us together. I had reached a place where my professional and personal worlds no longer clashed. They complemented each other. My companies thrived under my leadership, not just because of strategy or acumen, but because of the culture I had cultivated: respect, transparency, and empowerment. Employees came to me not only with business challenges, but seeking mentorship, guidance, and reassurance. I had become more than a CEO. I had become a force that inspired others to rise alongside me. One quiet morning, I walked through the garden with my granddaughter in my arms. Her small fingers curled around mine, her eyes wide with curiosity and trust. Richard approached, carrying a cup of coffee, his face calm, content, but still reflective of the man who had endured so much and emerged stronger. "She's learning fast," he said softly, nodding toward her. "Yes," I replied, smiling, "but she'll learn more from how we live than what we say." He glanced at me, a mixture of gratitude and admiration in his eyes. "You've taught me more than I thought possible, about resilience, about grace, about strength, about life." I let his words settle, but I didn't allow sentiment to cloud the moment. "And you've taught me too," I said, meeting his gaze. "About patience, about redemption, about the power of choosing differently." Life wasn't perfect. Scars remained. There were memories that would never fade. Moments of betrayal and pain that still stirred when I least expected it. But those scars no longer defined me. They reminded me of my journey, of the woman I had become, and of the life I had chosen to live fully, unapologetically, and wisely. Later that day, my mother joined me in my study. She looked around, observing the papers, the awards, the journals, evidence of the transformation I had achieved. She didn't need to speak to convey approval. Her presence alone said it all. After a pause, she finally broke the silence. "You've done well," she said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of emotion. "Not just in business, but in life. You've built yourself, protected yourself, and created a legacy worth honoring. I'm proud of you, daughter." Tears welled in my eyes, but I held them back. Not out of restraint, but because I had reached a place of quiet, composed fulfillment. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything. For letting me fall, for letting me learn, for letting me rise." She reached out and hugged me, firm, grounding, affirming. "Remember," she said, "forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it frees the future. Protect that freedom. Cherish it. Use it." That night, I returned to my journal, pen in hand. I had learned the power of reflection, the clarity of writing down victories and lessons, and the importance of honoring growth. I wrote, "I have lived storms and emerged transformed. I have loved and learned, lost and rebuilt. I have forgiven, but I will not forget. I have chosen myself, my life, my path. I am no longer defined by the past. I am the architect of my present, the creator of my future, the guardian of my heart. And in this, I am whole." As I closed the journal, I felt a calm unlike any before. The mansion was quiet, save for the soft breathing of a family asleep, safe and cherished. I walked to the balcony, staring up at the star-filled sky. No storm, no darkness, no betrayal could touch me here. I was reborn. Not from privilege, not from luck, but from pain, struggle, resilience, and unwavering determination. And as I stood there, letting the night embrace me, I understood the final truth. The destruction my mother had orchestrated years ago wasn't just about punishing those who harmed me. It was about giving me the tools, the clarity, and the strength to rise, to rebuild, and to claim my life fully. I had done more than survive. I had flourished. Richard's daughter slept peacefully inside. My mother smiled in her chair, and the legacy we were creating together glimmered quietly in the warmth of the home. The storms of the past had shaped me, but they no longer controlled me. I was the storm now, the calm, the force, the power, and the promise of life lived on my own terms. And for the first time, truly, I was at peace.